After an exceptional rookie season, CJ Stroud is heading into his second year with a stacked group of playmakers surrounding him, but we are still uncertain that he is worth his hefty price tag in 2024 fantasy drafts. We dig into the fantasy outlook for the entire Houston Texans offense on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. I am one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. How's it going? I am also doing another job here as well to change things up here. I'm a NFL fantasy and betting writer for sportingnews.com. That's where you can find me. And it is a special show. We're doing the Houston Texans. I know it's been tough out there. Michelle and her wife, Kate, live there down in Houston. So it's been a tough week navigating Hurricane Beryl for them and for all of you. So trying to give you an uplifting note here. There's a lot of hype about your Texans. Hopefully they'll be able to repair the stadium and go forward. But we're going to have a lot of fun talking about the Texans today because they're one of the more exciting up-and-coming teams in the AFC and NFL at large.
Yeah, I've never really been a huge Texans fan because I just moved here a couple years ago. But I will say I am very, very excited to get to watch Texans play this year. I'm so pumped they got CJ Stroud. It should just be a really fun team to watch and a really, really fun team for fantasy. Before we start today's episode, I want to remind everybody today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. So we're headed into the AFC South. We are almost through all 32 teams. We don't have very many left, but starting with the AFC South, we are going with the Houston Texans because they're just super exciting. Last year, they really unexpectedly finished 10-7, made the playoffs in CJ Stroud's rookie season, finished 13th in team points per game, 10th in fantasy points per game. Stroud won Offensive Rookie of the Year and finished as a top 10 fantasy quarterback. Well, wide receiver Nico Collins broke out. He finished as a top 10 fantasy wide receiver. Tank Dell was killing it as a rookie before fracturing his leg in week 13. Then they go all in this offseason. They trade for wide receiver Stefon Diggs. They trade for running back Joe Mixon. They're able to keep their really great young offense coordinator and Bobby Slowick and just keep this all together to really help CJ Stroud get even better in his second season. It's very exciting. So let's start with Stroud here. His ADP is quarterback 5, 45th overall. I think both you and I see CJ Stroud's talent. We're very, very excited about him and think he can be a great NFL quarterback, but I'm not willing to pay up quarterback 5 price tag for a second-year quarterback, especially a second-year quarterback who does not run, right? You have to just rely on everything with his arm. So why is he going so high, Vinny? Like, what is the appeal with him going as quarterback 5 right around, the Lamar Jacksons of the world?
Yeah, I think everyone's seeing him as the next Joe Burrow, right? I mean, kind of parallel paths. I mean, one was at Ohio State at one point, and CJ Stroud finished his career there, and up and coming pocket passer who was excellent right away. His team has got an uptick. There's a lot of buzz about it, right? So I think there's a little bit of parallel with that. And we're looking at Stroud as being maybe the new Burrow, and Burrow's a couple spots behind him. But you're right. The non-running quarterback is really hard to put up this high. And again, this is asking for a big leap. This is like 5 spots just because he added Stefon Diggs. Well, the other thing is the Texans are a better complete team. So let's remember that. They're not necessarily going to be in a lot of shootouts because you're going to have some grinding games against the Colts and Jaguars and Titans. This team is pretty stacked defensively. They went out and got Danielle Hunter. So they've got some playmakers on that side with Will Anderson and some of the people that are cleaning up for D'Amico Ryan. So I don't think this is a team that's going to just sit there and try to put up 30 to 40 points per game. I think what you might see is the version of the 49ers with not a Jimmy Garoppolo, but somewhere in between a Garoppolo and Brock Purdy, where you can see the numbers going up there. They did keep their offense coordinator, Bob Slowick. He didn't go anywhere, much like Ben Johnson in Detroit. So that's a good variable in place here for Stroud. But yeah, it's very hard to say that I like him more than Richardson, because Richardson had explosive games. Anthony Richardson in the same division, if he'd stayed healthy, I don't know what you could have got from him. I think you were looking at maybe a top 5, top 6 QB, and maybe Richardson would have been hyped all the way to number 4 on the board. So I think there's a lot of intrigue over Stroud. But again, I don't know if you're going to get any value here, because do you think he's really going to finish ahead of Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson? Do you think he's going to finish close enough to Patrick Mahomes? Do you think he's going to finish that much higher than Joe Burrow to justify this cost? So again, I love CJ Stroud in reality. He's one of the best young quarterbacks in this league, and we're going to enjoy watching him for a long time. But this cost is way too high in relation to the rest of the pocket quarterbacks. And I haven't even talked about the guys behind him. They include Jordan Love and Dak Prescott and Brock Purdy, some of these guys we've talked about. So again, we've talked about don't go too high at quarterback, don't go too low at quarterback, but sometimes the middle can be tricky when you have some really good values afterward.
Yeah, I'll say with Stroud, like, it's just the price tag. If he was 2 rounds later, I'd be much more open to him, because like last year we saw it. He finished as a quarterback 9 in points per game as a rookie. That's a really, really hard thing to do. He averaged 18.4 points per game last year. But when he had Tank Dell, so weeks 1 through 12, because Tank Dell broke his leg very early in week 13, weeks 1 through 12, Stroud was averaging 20.3 points per game during that span. That was more than Dak Prescott averaged last year on the season. That was right underneath Lamar Jackson by 0.3 points per game. So we did see that really top-notch play from him when he had both Tank Dell and Nico Collins. And now he should have both of those guys plus Stefon Diggs. So you can see him finishing as a top 5 quarterback. But the second half, without Tank Dell, it way fell off. From weeks 13 through 18, it was only 4 games he played during this span, averaged 13.3 points per game. So it was a big fall off, and that is why he finished a little bit lower than he did on the entire season. But it's just the price tag compared to others that can do that as well, right? When you bring up Brock Purdy and CJ Stroud in very, very similar offenses, both absolutely stacked, and you can get Brock Purdy at 84 overall or take Stroud at 45, like, I'm just going to wait and take Purdy. It's nothing that I don't think Stroud's going to be great. I just also think Purdy can do exactly what Stroud can do in terms of overall stats and fantasy finishes. So that's just where I'm at here. Like, I'm not taking Stroud at 45 when there's these other guys later in the draft that can do what he can do.
Yeah, and I wonder if his price will come down a little bit. I doubt it. I mean, there's been momentum building ever since the end of last season in the numbers, but you're also giving up some opportunity costs to other positions. James Cook, Kenneth Walker, Amari Cooper. These are some of the players going around him. Trey McBride, if you're looking for an edge at tight end, even Devonta Smith, who can be down, but you're looking at a wide receiver 2 that can be really good here in an offense where he's locked into. So there's a lot of things that you're also giving up at other positions if you're going to take the chance on Stroud. So again, it's very tough. I mean, this is why, again, in 1 QB leagues, going for one of these guys early or waiting a little bit until that best value and someone who can give you well above their draft position is what you're looking for. And it's really hard to get that the higher you go up, right? By definition, if you're the QB5, there's not much more to go up, and you can't get the real home run return. So last year was great, right? Because he was undervalued, was undrafted in a lot of leagues, most leagues, and you got him and you were set for most of the season, but you're not going to get that type of value. And that tends to happen. So we'll see. I think he'll let down a little bit this year, and then his price will come down, and then he'll be a lot more attractive next year. And again, just because you add a weapon in Diggs doesn't mean you're just going to add to the numbers, right? It just could be diversified. There could be more people involved that get those passes and touchdowns. It doesn't mean, oh, here's another 1,000 yards and a touch and 6 touchdowns that are coming your way. I mean, I know a lot of us understand that, but again, I don't think that bump is justified just for adding Stefon Diggs.
Yeah, and he definitely should throw more touchdowns this year. Like, there is upside for him. It's just comparing his price to the other guys. Just wait, because there's upside with Jordan Love and Dak Prescott and Kyler Murray and Jaden Daniels even way later. So there's just guys that have similar upside to CJ Stroud that aren't as risky with their pick. But we will get into CJ Stroud's all of his weapons, right? Because I mean, is this the best trio wide receiver group in the league? Possibly, with Nico Collins, Stefon Diggs, and Tank Dell. So we have to figure out who in the world is going to lead this group in fantasy points, because that's a really hard thing to navigate. But I think I might have the answer for it.
Yeah, and we'll see if I agree with that answer, and we'll do that in our next segment. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, style, eBay Motors has got you covered with more than 22 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. For all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, Michelle, let's break down these wide receivers. And I'll let you go because you have I think, a clear direction on where we're going to go here, but I'll just introduce the candidates here. Nico Collins got the massive contract extension in the offseason. Right now, wide receiver 13 on the board, so right outside the wide receiver ones, 19th overall. Stefon Diggs, an elite wide receiver 2, wide receiver 20, 25th overall. Then Tank Dell, as you would expect, a wide receiver 3 value at 31 at his position, 57 overall. So break this down for us. How are you going to see this passing game distributed between these three guys?
So let's start with the two guys that were actually there last year, and then we'll throw in Stefon Diggs because that's the wrench here, right? Like, he's the guy that's making this so hard to figure out, all three of them. But with Nico Collins last year finishing as a wide receiver 6, his finish sounds much nicer than what you felt last year, right? He had 5 games as a top 5 wide receiver, another one as a top 6 wide receiver on the week. So he had 5 games scoring 19 plus fantasy points on the week in half PPR. The rest of the weeks of the season, he scored under 12 or fewer fantasy points, also with a handful of games under 6 fantasy points. So he did disappear a lot, and then he just threw in some huge games. And we have to remember he got to play a half of a season, well, nearly a half of a season without Tank Dell. Well, on the other hand, Tank Dell comes in as a first-year player, immediately breaks out. He played 9 games with 30 plus offensive snaps last year, averaged 17.4 points per game in full PPR in those games. That's the same amount as what Puka Nacua scored last year. He only had bad games in his first career game in the NFL, week 4 when he got hurt, and then week 8, the first game back from that injury. Besides that, he was just dominant as a wide receiver with 20 points, 25, 29, 19, 29, 17. He only played he played 10 games last year. And those were a lot of games I just brought up that he was killing it. So I personally, if I'm leaning between the two guys who were here last year, I think Tank Dell's the better talent overall. And I think he's the guy that CJ Stroud kind of depends on more. If you just between Nico Collins and Tank Dell, who would you rather lean on in terms of their cost? Because right now Collins 19th overall, Dell is 57th. Are you willing to pay up for Collins, or do you think Dell will have the same upside?
Yeah, I think that's a big difference when you look at it, Michelle. I mean, you're talking about 19 to 57. That's a lot of picks, right? And you just have to bridge that gap somewhat. And if you have Nico Collins disappoint a little bit and Tank Dell just does anything that remotely resembles what he did as a rookie, you're in business here. And this could just be upside down the way we're looking at it as well, where I would not be shocked if Tank Dell ends up being the top receiving option for CJ Stroud. And I think it's just too high of a cost here for Nico Collins. I mean, you just can't discount Diggs being around here and Dell's presence. If he's healthy, I don't think you can go that way. Just expect Collins to duplicate what was his breakout season here. So when you look at that, I mean, I think Diggs actually might be the guy that I'm least interested in because he faded. Remember, everyone was so frustrated about what he did down the stretch for the Bills, and it's not like they gave up a lot to get him. It wasn't a blockbuster deal a la the Vikings and Bills making that deal for Stefon Diggs. It was a few years later. Diggs has slowed down. His production wasn't what it was that we're used to down the stretch last season. So I think Diggs is going to be more of that complimentary target. And I just don't think you can discount Dell. Like you said, you just can't say that this relationship is, oh, we're not going to connect. I mean, keep in mind that Stroud is the guy who lobbied for Dell to be drafted to the Texans. So he knows that he's his boy. And Diggs is a newcomer. Diggs may try to demand the ball a little bit more, but to be honest with you, Collins and Dell are the more talented big play receivers at this stage of their career. So I can see Diggs being kind of that reliable guy who gets open on third downs, right? And he gets trust him a little bit more when the plays aren't there downfield to Dell and Collins on the outside. So I can see Diggs kind of having a hybrid slot role and kind of filling that role that Noah Brown had to some degree, looking at targets that way. So if I had to look at it, I think Collins is still going to finish pretty high, but I put him down into the wide receiver twos. I put Dell at a shot to finish at the back end of the wide receiver twos. And I look at Diggs more as a wide receiver 3. So that's how I kind of consider it. And then if you compare that with Collins and Dell, that gets to your point where Dell is the better value.
Yeah, Dell led the team in targets from weeks 1 through 12 when he actually, the week and what's crazy is he actually missed some time during that span as well. So 75 targets, he led the team. He led the team with 7 receiving touchdowns as well. So I just think he's going to be the target leader in this offense. And I actually don't get his price. It's wide receiver 31 ADP right now. He finishes a wide receiver 16 in points per game last year as a rookie, and that includes the game he got hurt and had 0 points because he got hurt in the first 5 seconds. Still was wide receiver 16 in points per game, going nearly double that later. Wide receiver 31. That's just too low, all because they traded for Stefon Diggs. Let's jump into Stefon Diggs here because we know he's a great talent, right? But he's getting older. We saw him fall off a ton at the end of last year. He's 30 years old, turns 31 in November. So he dominated the first half of last season, averaging over about 18 points per game in half PPR, but then only 7.3 points per game the rest of the season, including the playoffs. What do you do with Stefon Diggs? Because if he was even with the Bills still as a wide receiver 1, I think we'd be a little bit nervous about drafting him. Now he joins a team where he's crowded. He had nobody else to compete with the Bills, and now it's crowded. So we know he's talented, but it's dealt so much with volume. I can't jump on board with drafting Stefon Diggs as the wide receiver 20 in ADP right now.
Yeah, everything is working against him, Michelle. I mean, you're right. He's got to share significant amount of targets. He hasn't had to do that since Adam Thielen, and he was trying to fight for targets with him in Minnesota. I mean, he's been the man in Buffalo. We had flashes of Gabe Davis making big plays, but they didn't really incorporate Dalton Kincaid as much as we would have thought as a rookie tight end. So, yeah, he's been the alpha, and he likes being the alpha, but he's slowing down. And just keep in mind, this can happen very quickly at age 30. We saw with AJ Green and Julio Jones, 2 guys that are headed to the Hall of Fame, that their numbers declined. You'll probably see that a little bit with DeAndre Hopkins happen a little bit more this year with the Titans going beyond 30 as a once great receiver. So Diggs also could end up in Canton. We'll see if his numbers all add up. But again, we probably have seen the best of Stefon Diggs just in terms of everything. It's also a new offense for him. All these things are at play here for Diggs. So again, I think Diggs is going to be a valuable receiver in reality and fantasy and still come out potentially in the top 36, but I just do not like him in the top 20.
So to finish off ranking these wide receivers, so you got Nico Collins at 19th overall in ADP, Diggs at 35 overall, or Tank Dell at 60th overall. Rank those in the order of what you would like to draft them in.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go Dell, Collins, Diggs. I think it's pretty clear to me now.
Yeah, I think so too. Tank, and it's close between
We love
Collins and
Tank
Diggs
on
just
the
because
show.
Collins
So.
is so much higher in cost and he's going around like Chris Olave and Drake London. But I do still think Nico Collins will have huge games to help you. Like he's going to be very much like a Mike Evans to me, where he's going to have these huge games that wins you weeks. and then disappear and hurt you, but it's still okay because like he's just gonna have those monster weeks. It's just like another Mike Evans.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what Tank can do, and maybe his ADP and ranking will go up as we have better indication of his full health and all the off-field stuff that happened. If those things come into better focus here in training camp, I think you'll see Dell's value go up as well. So maybe this is the best time to go after Dell if you're drafting in leagues, whether it's redraft or best ball.
Yeah, I'm really excited for Tank Dell. I really wish Stefon Diggs didn't get traded there because I would have been so high on him this year, but maybe that's saving me, right? Because I think I would have been crazy high. We're going to get into Joe Mixon because he got traded to the Texans as well. And then also Dalton Schultz because he was somewhat relevant last year. Does Diggs really just kill Schultz and maybe nobody else? We'll get into that in our final segment to wrap up the Houston, Texas Fantasy Outlook. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting. Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I feel like Joe Mixon has been in the league for 1,000 years. He is still, he's 28 years old. Actually, he turns 28 years old in a couple weeks. So he's still only 27 somehow. Last year, he was a running back 13 in points per game, running back 7 overall. And now he's going as running back 15 for his cost. So I do think his cost is fair. There are some things I'm worried about, but I want to hear your thoughts on him first. Do you think the Texans situation is better for him than the Bengals situation?
That's a good question. I mean, finishing so high that says, hey, it was a pretty good situation to begin with, right? It didn't always seem that way, but then you look up and he gets enough catches, he gets enough touchdowns, he has enough rushing yard games where they put him over the top. So right now, I look at this and say, are we going to get much more than we had with Devin Singletary? And he was pretty good down the stretch. And that's going to be the fun thing that we're going to measure, right? What do we get from Devin Singletary in New York, replacing Saquon Barkley? What do we get from Zach Moss, replacing Mixon in Cincinnati? And what do we get from this situation, Mixon replacing Singletary? So it's kind of a triangle that we're trying to figure out. I mean, I think we're established here on the show that we would prefer the value of Moss over all these guys at this stage, but Mixon's a hard one to me. I don't know if I'm too excited to draft him. I mean, think about these running backs around him, Michelle. I think I want all of these guys instead. I'll just say this. RB15, 53rd overall. He was RB13 last year, so you're hoping that he's just a little bit worse than he was with the Bengals. But you have James Cook, higher upside, and the offense is great here with Joe Brady. Kenneth Walker, I think the offense is going to play in his favor as well. Alvin Kamara, I know it's not as kind of safe, but he's Alvin Kamara, and he found a way to produce when you look at the average scoring from last year. And Ramondre Stevenson, who just got a good contract and doesn't have to deal with Ezekiel Elliott anymore, just as Antonio Gibson. So all these guys are there. I think I would take all these guys ahead of Joe Mixon. I just don't think you're getting a lot of upside. Again, something's got to give here if you're going to add to the passing game and be a passing first offense. I think Mixon is also slowing down. I mean, there was keys of that. I mean, his yards per carry have gone down, and I just don't see him being spectacular. This is how I see it. Maybe you get 1,300 scrimmage yards and like 7 touchdowns, but is that the most exciting thing you can get running back? I think you can get that from a lot of RB2s, right? So again, 15 is a little aggressive for me because it's tied in assuming that he's the same old Joe Mixon.
Yeah, I mean, and Joe Mixon's never been good. Let's just be clear there. I've never been a Joe Mixon fan. He's always just been average. I know coming out of school, he's great, so people just held on to that forever. But over the last 5 seasons, he's averaged just 4.0 yards per carry. And blame it on the offensive line, sure, but the offensive line was fine last year, and he didn't do anything any different. And I also just don't think he's going to get any targets in this offense either because it's so stacked everywhere. Why would you be, dumping it off to the running back all too much? And then also, like, when it comes to carries, I do think he's going to clearly lead this offense in carries. I mean, Damian Pierce is still there, but like, not worried about that. He's going to get a ton of carries, but the Texans last year attempted the tied for 20th fewest rushing attempts per game in the league last year, with Stroud being a rookie with limited weapons, and they still only averaged 26 rushing attempts per game. Again, that was tied for 20th in the NFL. So I think he's going to be heavily reliant on touchdowns, which might be okay because he's in an awesome offense. But like you mentioned, the running backs going around him, I want James Cook, I want Alvin Kamara, I want Ramondre Stevenson over him. It's interesting to me because you said you'd rather Kenneth Walker over Joe Mixon. Those two, I think that's the hardest to pick from, because with Walker, yeah, I don't know. He's also not a guy that gets too many targets. He's also very touchdown dependent. We don't know what the Seahawks offense is going to look like. And then he also, Zach Charbonnet is there, right? Like, how much does he steal from him? So between those two, I might lean Mixon. But why are you leaning Walker over Mixon?
Yeah, I think number one is it's the age. He's a younger, more explosive player. We have seen some flashes of really great play from Walker, right? When he gets the opportunity. I know Zach Charbonnet could cut into a little bit more this year, but again, keep in mind it's a defensive-minded coach. He'll want to run the ball a little bit more, take pressure off Geno Smith with that offense, and realize that. So I think that's where I think Kenneth Walker's volume will go up, and I think he's a capable enough receiver where that can happen. And I think if someone's going to eat up all the touchdowns there, I mean, on the Seahawks, you're looking at probably DK Metcalf, a little bit of the other receivers, and Walker probably scoring majority of what they're doing there. So I think Mixon is going to compete with other guys to get in the end zone and all those things. So again, Walker's younger, and I think that's the number one reason, but there are some other factors behind that.
That makes sense. That makes sense. But yeah, I'm going Mixon over him. But I'll say, like, there's running backs later than Mixon that I'd still rather like Najee Harris going at 71. Or what about Zamir White, your boy, going at 80? Or are you going Mixon at 53? I think I know your answer here.
Yeah, I mean, Zamir White really doesn't have competition, and they're going to run to take pressure off their guy as well, and a pretty good offensive line to run the ball there in Las Vegas. So, yeah, I'm going Zamir White. Again, I don't like older running backs in general unless they're Derrick Henry, who we talked about last year. If they're going to the Hall of Fame, that's a little bit different, but Joe Mixon is not anywhere near a Hall of Famer. He's just a guy to me, and probably just an entry-level replacement here to Devin Singletary, just a guy that they upgrade a little bit, but I don't think they're going to get much more than they got with Singletary.
Yeah. Dalton Schultz was a guy that just proved again that tight end, so much of it comes down to situation that you're in. Like, when you're a Dallas tight end, it's going to be good. When you go to a different team, it's not going to be as good, right? So he was a tight end 11 in points per game last year, just scored 8.1 points per game in half PPR. Now he's a tight end 14 in cost. So it's like no one's really drafting him expecting much. He like went through a period of time last year from weeks 4 through 9 where he had 4 really good weeks out of 5. But besides that, he really did absolutely nothing in the year at all. And now they add in Stefon Diggs. It's hard to see any room for him to get volume at all in terms of targets, maybe get some touchdowns. But no, I have zero interest in Dalton Schultz. What about you?
Yeah, the only Dalton I'm going to be drafting is Kincaid, because when we look at Schultz here, it's tough because I think, remember when we went in last year that Schultz was in a great spot because we weren't sure what we were going to get from the Texans wide receivers? Well, that totally blew up because Collins and Dell really just changed the whole outlook on their receivers very quickly, and probably because they had a quarterback to throw to them, and that opened things up. And that's the nature of their offense, where they didn't force Schultz in there, and part of it is Stroud was throwing downfield. He wasn't taking many of the checkdowns that we saw with other quarterbacks here. So again, with Diggs there, I think Diggs is a good possession guy. He can get open everywhere. He can line up in the slot if you need him. So inside, work in the middle of the field. You still have a lot of players there that can eat him, and not a lot of vacated targets. They have added targets to this team. So I don't think you're looking at a very good season for Dalton Schultz at all here. So again, look at the people around him. Dallas Goedert, not excited about him, but I still think he's a better value a couple spots earlier as tight end 12. TJ Hawkinson, we know when he gets back, he'll be better than Schultz, so keep that in mind. And then you have Pat Freiermuth, who I really like this year because the more 12 personnel and keeping him on the field in Pittsburgh, and then Cole Kmet. I mean, not juiciest, but again, I think he's in a very Dalton Schultz type situation, except again, he might get a little bit more usage because he's with a rookie quarterback, but that's it. I mean, this is kind of where you want to cut it off. And I think definitely Schultz is not someone I'm going to be looking to target in any draft. I might take him as a backup tight end if I really wanted to get one at some point. But yeah, I'm not going to target him as my starter in any league.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the names you just ran down, like, just get a tight end before you get this deep
Yeah.
into the woods, right? Like, Jake Ferguson is probably that last guy there that I'm going to feel good about putting into my lineup in week 1 and being like, "Yeah, I'm down to start him every week." But once you get down to what you just mentioned with Goddard and Schultz and Freiermuth and Kmet, maybe Pat Freiermuth has upside, maybe.
Yeah.
But, like, Goddard, Schultz, Kmet, ugh, disgusting. So, yeah, just get a tight end before these guys, please. That is key here. That is it for today's show. Thank you to you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Every dayers, Vinnie and I will be back next week to finish up the AFC South teams. Don't miss it. Have a great weekend. Bye, y'all.
All right. Got it.
Woo woo.
So
All right. We'll figure out the